The section of your grocery store that sells Greek yogurt has been growing for 20 years. Walk into any large supermarket today and you will find 12 or 15 feet of it, strained, thick, marketed to athletes, to parents, to anyone trying to make a fast and credible protein choice before 8 in the morning. 7 grams of protein per serving, sometimes 10. The labels are clean, the endorsements are prominent, and the message is consistent. This is what smart dairy looks like now. Farmer's cheese is not in that section. It is rarely given its own facing at all. If your store carries it, it is somewhere near the ricotta, in a modest rectangular container with no lifestyle imagery and no athlete on the label. It is older than Greek yogurt's American marketing moment by roughly 2 centuries, and the version that Amish grandmothers pressed in cheesecloth hanging above the kitchen basin carried a protein density the yogurt aisle still has not matched. They called it Schmierkase. The word is Pennsylvania Dutch, borrowed directly from German, and it means nothing more complicated than smear cheese. A cheese you spread. A cheese so simple to make it required no aging, no specialized culture, no cave, and no more than 20 minutes of active work on a wood stove. The families who made it did not think of it as a nutritional strategy. They thought of it as breakfast, as the thing you spread on bread before a morning of field work, as the food you brought to a neighbor who had taken ill. What those families did not have the language to explain, and what took science another 150 years to confirm, is what Schmierkase was doing every morning for the people who ate it. The answer has very little to do with the protein number on a label. It has everything to do with what happens to that protein once it reaches your stomach, and there is a specific name for what it does there. The Amish who ate Schmierkase every morning understood the practical result of that process long before any laboratory identified the mechanism. A farmer who ate it at 6 in the morning was still drawing fuel from that breakfast at noon. What was happening inside, and why it still matters now, is the part that no amount of label reading will tell you. The first German-speaking Anabaptist settlers arrived in Pennsylvania beginning in the 1680s. They came from Switzerland, from the Rhineland, from the Alsace region along the German-French border. Communities of Mennonites and Amish who had been moving across Europe for a century ahead of religious persecution, and who carried with them, among everything else, the dairy habits of small farmsteading households. By the early 1700s, communities in Lancaster County and the surrounding valleys of southeastern Pennsylvania were making fresh, soft cheese from clabbered milk as regularly as they baked bread. This was not a Sunday tradition, it was a Tuesday one. The method was as simple as the name. Raw milk from the household cow was left to clabber naturally in a warm kitchen until the lactic acid bacteria did what they always do when left alone: thicken the milk, acidify it gently, and separate it into soft curds and pale whey. A heavy iron pot, a cloth of linen or muslin hung from a hook above the kitchen basin, and patience. The whey dripped through overnight while the household slept. What emerged from that cloth in the morning, mild and slightly lactic and dense with concentrated protein, was ready within the hour, or left weighted and firm enough by noon to slice and carry to the field. The knowledge required to make it was not specialized. It was domestic, passed from mother to daughter without ceremony, the way you pass down any piece of daily knowledge that simply works. The most common accompaniment was apple butter. The pairing was so standard in plain households across the 19th century that it appeared without remark on documented Amish Sunday lunch tables alongside homemade bread, pickled vegetables, and coffee, the same menu repeated across seasons and districts and decades. Schmierkase and apple butter. The combination had a flavor logic to it that anyone who has tried it understands immediately. The richness of the fresh cheese cutting through the concentrated tartness of the cooked apple. The two things together making a breakfast that was satisfying without being heavy. What matters about this tradition is not just how old it was, but how consistently it appeared across communities that had no coordinated contact with one another. Mennonite settlers in Ontario made the same cheese from the same method. Hutterite colonies that established themselves across the Great Plains following their immigration in the 1870s and 1880s carried equivalent dairy traditions with them from their communities in Russia and Central Europe. Swiss Brethren households in Ohio. Russian Mennonite farms spread across Kansas and Nebraska. Every one of these groups, working independently, without a recipe exchanged through shared leadership, arrived at the same product through the same logic: fresh milk, gentle heat, cloth, time. The independent convergence of widely separated communities on a single preparation is not coincidence. It is evidence. The tradition began leaving ordinary American households after the Second World War. Refrigeration became standard. Pasteurized milk arrived in waxed cartons from central dairies. The family cow disappeared from most American properties within a generation, and with her went the clabbering, the iron pot on the stove, the cloth hung dripping above the basin on a winter morning. Supermarkets offered cottage cheese instead, which was a version of the same thing processed at industrial scale, wetter and more consistent, and produced with standardized commercial cultures rather than the ambient bacteria of a farmhouse kitchen. By the 1960s, it was marketed as a diet food. By the 1970s, it was eaten from plastic tubs with canned fruit as a substitute for real dairy meals. What the supermarket product did not carry forward was the density of the traditional pressed version. Factory cottage cheese runs to approximately 79% water by weight. Traditional Schmierkase, pressed overnight in cloth with a weight on top, was considerably denser than that. That density is not a textural preference. It is a nutritional fact. And the reason it matters requires one close look at what Schmierkase is mostly made of. The dominant protein in farmer's cheese is casein. In whole milk, casein accounts for somewhere between 75 and 80% of the total protein content. When you make fresh cheese by separating curds from whey, you are essentially retaining the casein in the curd while the whey drains away through the cloth. What remains behind is heavily casein-weighted protein in a concentrated, dense matrix. This is the structural reason that pressed Schmierkase carries significantly more protein per gram than commercial Greek yogurt. A lightly drained farmer's cheese runs to 12 or 13 grams per 100 grams, already meaningfully higher than Greek yogurt's 8 to 10 grams per 100 grams. But a Schmierkase, pressed overnight in cloth, with enough moisture removed to bring it to the density traditional households expected, concentrates the casein further still to 20 grams per 100 grams and higher. That is where the comparison in the title comes from. The pressing step is not a preference. It is what turns a soft, fresh cheese into something structurally different, a product that delivers roughly 3 times the protein density of the commercial Greek yogurt sitting in the aisle beside it. The number matters less than what casein does once you eat it. When casein reaches the acidic environment of the stomach, something happens that whey protein does not do. It gels. The casein molecules respond to the stomach's acidity by bonding together into a slow, soft clot, a gel that the stomach must work through gradually rather than processing in a quick pass. Research into dairy protein digestion has documented this gelling mechanism clearly and established that it extends the release of amino acids into the bloodstream across several hours rather than delivering them in a single concentrated spike. The practical consequence of that slow release is sustained satiety, steady energy, and a prolonged supply of the amino acids that muscle tissue uses for maintenance and repair throughout a working morning. A farmer eating Schmierkase on bread at 6 in the morning was still drawing a steady supply of amino acids from that meal at 10, possibly at noon. This is the mechanism behind the practical knowledge that made this cheese the standard harvest breakfast across plain communities for 200 years. The people who ate it did not know about casein gelling or amino acid release rates. They knew that Schmierkase held you. They knew it as a fact of daily experience, tested every harvest season for generations, and the knowledge was passed forward not as nutrition advice, but as simple practice. This is what you put on the table before a long day. Research in the last 2 decades has identified something else the Amish could not have named. When casein is broken down during digestion, it releases bioactive fragments called casein phosphopeptides. These peptides have been shown in multiple studies to enhance the body's absorption of calcium and phosphorus during digestion. Separately, certain sequences within digested casein produce peptides with measurable anti-hypertensive effects, meaning they act on the same systems that regulate blood pressure through a mechanism that is gradual and cumulative rather than dramatic. Populations with sustained higher intake of fermented dairy have tended to show lower rates of hypertension across longitudinal nutritional studies, and these peptide sequences are one of the proposed mechanisms. The Amish did not know they were eating antihypertensive peptides every morning. What they knew was that Schmierkase was something you brought to people who were unwell. The cost of losing this accumulates quietly. It does not show up in a single blood panel. What disappears when Schmierkase leaves the morning table is a sustained protein anchor, a slower and more durable delivery of amino acids than modern fast dairy foods tend to provide, and a set of bioactive peptides that no amount of Greek yogurt marketing has yet found a way to put back on the label. That loss is invisible until you start looking at what replaced it. And when you look clearly at what replaced it, you begin to see what the tradition was actually doing all along. The detail about Schmierkase that even people who know Amish food history tend to miss is not the nutrition and not the method. It is the occasions on which it was carried. In plain communities throughout Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana during the 19th century, there was a practice of visiting the sick that was not optional and not informal. When a neighbor or community member was ill, when a woman had recently given birth and could not yet cook for herself, when an elderly member of the community had reached the point where daily food preparation was no longer possible, families organized and arrived with food. The food brought was not chosen for convenience or because it was easy to transport. It was chosen deliberately, based on accumulated community knowledge about what supported recovery. Schmierkase appeared in those baskets with a consistency that documented accounts of plain community foodways in Pennsylvania describe across the 19th century. Fresh, soft cheese was a standard sickroom provision, carried alongside bone broth, stewed apple, and dried medicinal herbs. The reasoning, expressed plainly by the women who brought it, was practical and consistent. It was easy to eat without appetite. It settled without burdening a weak stomach, and it stayed with you. Those are not the words of a nutrition protocol. They are the words of observed experience across hundreds of households over several generations. What they were observing, without the biochemical vocabulary to name it, maps precisely onto what the Casein research later confirmed. A slow-digesting protein that gels in the stomach, releases gradually, and requires minimal digestive energy to process is exactly what a recovering body needs when its metabolic resources are already compromised by illness or by the physical demands of childbirth. The Amish sickroom basket and the dietary recommendations of modern clinical nutritionists working with recovering patients arrive at the same product from opposite directions. The harvest dimension is the other thing that tends to get missed. During harvest weeks in Amish farming communities across Ohio and Indiana, when as many as 15 or 20 neighboring families came together to bring in a single farm's crop, the household feeding those workers at 6 in the morning produced breakfasts on a scale that required planning and substance. Historical accounts from Amish community records describe Schmierkase in harvest quantities, pressed into firm blocks the size of a brick, set alongside bread and eggs and cured meat, sliced and spread by hand for everyone at the table before the work began. What was being fed was sustained labor across a 10-hour day. The cheese was not chosen for its flavor alone. It was chosen because it worked, in the specific and practical sense that the people who ate it could work until noon without losing the fuel that breakfast had given them. This changes what the thumbnail claim is actually saying. 3 times the protein of Greek yogurt is a number that describes density. What the tradition was carrying forward was not a number. It was the understanding that how long protein lasts is as important as how much of it there is. The Amish held that understanding in their hands every harvest morning for 200 years. The yogurt aisle is still working on the question. Making Schmierkase at home requires a gallon of whole milk, a quarter cup of white vinegar, or an equivalent volume of fresh lemon juice, a large pot, and enough cheesecloth to line a colander with several layers to spare. The process takes roughly 20 minutes of active attention and several hours of draining time. The result is approximately 1.5 pounds of fresh cheese. Begin by warming the milk slowly in the pot over medium heat. You are looking for just below a rolling boil, around 185 to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, the point where small bubbles form steadily at the edges of the pot and the surface of the milk begins to steam visibly. Do not raise the heat to rush this step. Milk brought to temperature too quickly scorches on the bottom of the pot, and the scorched note comes through clearly in the finished cheese. Patience. Here is not optional, it is part of the method. When the milk reaches temperature, take the pot off the heat and pour the vinegar in slowly, in a thin, steady stream, stirring gently as you go. The curds will begin to form almost immediately, pulling away from the pale yellowish whey in soft white clusters. After the vinegar is fully incorporated, stop stirring. Put the spoon down. Let the pot sit undisturbed for 15 minutes. The separation will complete on its own during this time, and any stirring you do after the curds begin to form will break them into smaller pieces and reduce the yield. Line a colander with several layers of cheesecloth and set it over a large bowl deep enough to catch the whey without the bottom of the colander touching the liquid. Ladle or pour the curds carefully into the cloth. Gather the 4 corners, bring them together, and tie them securely. From here, you have 2 choices that produce 2 different cheeses. For a soft, spreadable Schmierkase, the kind that goes on bread with apple butter in the traditional way, hang the bundle over the bowl or over the sink and let it drain for 1 to 2 hours at room temperature. For the denser, firmer product, the kind pressed into blocks for harvest breakfasts and carried in sick room baskets, move the bundle into the refrigerator in the colander over the bowl. Set a small plate on top with a light weight on it and let it drain overnight. The overnight pressed version will give you a Schmierkase with significantly higher protein density per gram because you are removing more of the remaining moisture and concentrating the casein further. The most common mistake when making this at home is using ultra-high temperature pasteurized milk, sometimes labeled UHT or sold as shelf-stable milk in cartons that do not require refrigeration. This milk has been processed at temperatures high enough to alter the protein structure in a way that prevents proper curd formation. You add the vinegar and nothing happens, or the curds that form are tiny and weak and the yield is poor. Use standard pasteurized milk from a refrigerated carton. Raw milk, if you have access to it, will give you the closest product to what traditional Amish households made, with a slightly more complex flavor and a curd that sets more firmly. The quality of the finished Schmierkase depends entirely on the integrity of the Casein in the milk you start with, and UHT processing compromises exactly that structure. Salt the finished cheese to taste before serving. Mix in fresh herbs if you have them, chives or thyme or flat leaf parsley, or spread it plain on bread with apple butter alongside it. The combination that has been eaten in plain households for more than 300 years. The pairing will make sense to you the first time you try it, not as a historical exercise, as breakfast. The 12-foot Greek yogurt aisle exists because someone understood what modern consumers wanted: protein, convenience, and the feeling of a defensible choice made quickly on the way to work. That is a real thing to offer people, and no one who stocks their refrigerator with Greek yogurt is making a foolish decision. The issue is not with what the yogurt aisle offers. The issue is with the assumption that it represents some kind of ceiling, some peak of what dairy protein can do. That assumption holds only if you ignore what came before it. What came before it was older, required no marketing, and in the specific matter of how protein behaves inside the body over the course of a working morning was more effective. The casein in Schmierkase does not dissolve in 30 minutes. It holds. It was always going to hold. The tradition understood this as practical fact before the mechanism had a name, before anyone had documented casein gelling or measured amino acid release rates across a 3-hour window. The return to Schmierkase does not require a lifestyle change or a rejection of everything that came after it. It requires a gallon of whole milk, 20 minutes on a Tuesday evening, and a piece of cheesecloth. That is the full distance between what most people eat for breakfast protein and what an Amish grandmother pressed in cloth before dawn and set on the table for everyone who needed to work until the sun was past its height. The tradition did not disappear because something better replaced it. It disappeared because something faster did. The family cow became a dairy contract. The iron pot became a factory line. The cheesecloth became a sealed plastic tub at the back of a 12-foot aisle. And what was lost in that transition was not just a cheese. It was the understanding that how long a food sustains you is as important as how quickly it delivers. Schmierkase understood that. It still does for anyone who takes 20 minutes to make it.